All right, welcome back to the Unnamed Production Company. Today I am going to be answering RPG A Day 2018 questions 12, 13, 14, and 15. You'll notice it's just me, Sam, here today. This week has been really busy for us, so Caleb was actually able to record questions 10 and 11, and you'll see those in a separate video. This should bring us up through today, August 15th, and then hopefully either later this week or possibly this weekend, we might get together to bang out a few more questions. So, of course, you know, the usual YouTube thing, we'll go ahead and leave a link in the description below where you can find the blog, the infographic, and all the information that you need to participate in RPG A Day 2018 if you want to. And I'd highly recommend that you do, because the whole thing about this event, it's been happening, I think, for 5 years now. It's really about spreading positivity for the RPG hobby. And I think that that's something that we really need right now, especially in 2018. If you guys happen to do videos, blogs, or any sort of publicly shared responses to these questions, please let us know about them. Go ahead and leave a link in the comments section below. Just, you know, say, hey, here's the video that I did on this. We want to watch those. We want to respond. Part of what we do here, and the whole point of the Unnamed Production Company, is to build a community that kind of helps come together and improve your RPG experience. So if we can meet new people, that would be awesome. All right, so let's jump into it. So actually, for question 12, I'm going to answer one of the alternate questions, because I think question 12 was something like, you know, the crazy name for an NPC or something like that. So the first question I had was, what makes you want to GM? And this one's kind of funny. This one, actually, most honest answer for me is I need a little bit more control over the story. And what I find in many cases as a player is that often when I'm in a game as a player and I am seeing how the story is unfolding, I feel GM syndrome coming on, right? I feel like, oh, I might have done the scene a little bit differently, or, ooh, I'd really like to interact with this NPC, but the other players seem to want to do this thing, so we'll go along, right? Or what I tend to do as a player is I will sometimes try to jump in and take the lead. And that might not actually fit with my character concept. So one of the reasons that I like GMing, I think the main reason really, is that I want to have a little bit more control over the scene so that I can hopefully help, along with the players, create a really great narrative experience. So I think that's the big reason for me. And I'd love to hear, if you guys choose this question, what your answer would be. I want to go through these kind of quickly. I don't want to spend a ton of time on them because I have 4 that I'm doing today, so we'll see. Okay, so question number 13 of RPG A Day 2018 is, this was one of the original questions, describe how your play has evolved. So what's interesting is, as a player and as a GM, I used to be very much, really as a GM, I guess, I used to plan out a lot more stuff. I used to kind of script things and be much more on the rails. And as a player, I used to always sort of look to the GM and the other players for direction. And as I've evolved, both as a game master and as a player, I've actually come to be much more reactionary. And what I mean by that is I'm not necessarily looking for a prompt per se, but what I'm doing is I'm looking for a specific event or a specific thing that will allow me to have an interesting interaction with one of the player characters or an NPC. As a GM, that means that I don't pre-plan a lot of stuff. I will plan basically a hook and then let the players kind of run with it and see where they go and just react to what they do. So that can be a little bit more nerve-wracking in some cases because it means that I have to think a lot more on the fly. But usually I will prepare a certain, a few things, right? Like some notes and, some ideas for scenes and possible factions, NPCs, and whatever. So a bit more reactionary in my play style. And I think that actually is a good segue into question 14, which I chose, again, another alternate question. And that one was, how do you prepare for a one-shot? And it's actually similar to the answer to question 13, but for a one-shot, basically what I do is I first need to determine how much time I have allotted and how many players I have. And what I try to do is get about a 3 to 4 hour time slot with about 3 to 4 players. I prefer 3 players. And I'm not good at one-shots. I tend to have a problem with them running into 2 or 3 shots. But typically what I try to do is plan 3 scenes, right? The beginning scene, middle scene, and the ending scene. And the beginning scene, I typically like to start the players out in media res in a tense situation. So either that is you're running for your life, you're in combat, you're in an incredibly stressful social situation or something along those lines, and you are immediately thrust into the action. Now this can be tough on some players, especially sometimes players need a little bit of build-up. But what I try to do is either put a dynamic NPC in there or really try to get them to interact with each other and role play with each other and try to help problem solve this thing, right? And then you'll have a little bit of a downtime after that first scene where they're figuring it out and deciding what do you need to do next. Sometimes they will have already been given the information from a certain NPC or whatever it might be, but it'll say, okay, this is what Act 2 is. And then Act 2 is usually where they will be, it'll either be travel or they will be there'll be a role play encounter. They'll be getting more information. It's a little bit of a break from the high action, high intensity of scene 1. And it will lead into scene 3. And if I do it right, hopefully what happens is we build up the tension right at the end, and I drop a hook on them right at the end, and then of scene 2, and then into scene 3. Again, it's a fast ramp into that sort of final action, and hopefully there's resolution there. But I don't plan endings, and that's a big thing. I will plan encounters, in a sense that I want a certain thing to happen, but I don't necessarily plan how it will happen, and I don't necessarily plan an outcome, because I find that players tend to surprise you, and they will do things that you don't expect. So I try to stick to 3 acts. I think 3 acts is the perfect amount for generally a 3 to 4 hour one-shot. But depending on your players, you may want to adjust that, especially if they like to role play a lot, because that can sometimes bog down your scene. And so sometimes you need to move things along quickly. But preparing, usually it's bullet points: Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, names for NPCs. If there's a certain encounter in a dynamic location, I may go over some mechanics involved with that. If it's Edge of the Empire and they need to hack in somewhere, I'm going to have some rules for hacking and certain outcomes. If they roll a threat, a certain amount of threat, or they roll a despair, what might happen, stuff like that. So that's question 14, one of the alternate questions. How do you prepare for a one-shot? And then question 15, the last one, describe a tricky RPG experience that you enjoyed. And this one I had to think about a little bit, but this one was interesting because this one actually was the second session of an Uncharted World session that I got to be a player in over on Ivan Mike's channel, Ivan Mike 1968. I'll try to link the video in the description below, but it was very interesting, and it was tricky for me because it was powered by the apocalypse. And in the first session we played, it was run a lot more like a powered by the apocalypse session would run. But the second one, it was very intentional. Ivan had said, I'm going to try to run this a little bit more like a traditional OSR system. So as the GM, I'm going to have a little bit more control over things. I'm not going to necessarily use the same methods that you would use in a powered by the apocalypse game. So it felt much more traditional. And that was very tricky for me because that's not why I came to play Uncharted Worlds. But he had been very clear about that. And I knew that in, sort of in the back of my mind, I knew, okay, this is what I should expect. And so it was tricky for me because I felt very uncomfortable for the first maybe 20 minutes or so of the session. I had to adjust my expectations and I had to be like, okay, right, this is what we're doing. But it was a lot of fun in the end, primarily because Ivan created interesting encounters and NPCs that we interacted with. And I got to play with Jason from Dark Age of Roleplay and Eloy, who has been featured on their channels before. And, we had a great time. It was a fun, enjoyable experience. And so I think that was really tricky for me, but at the same time, it was very rewarding because, and it was enjoyable because I got to have a fun experience with those guys. So that has been my answers to questions 12, 13, 14, and 15 to RPG A Day 2018. Keep an eye out on the channel for the next set of questions, hopefully in the next few days here. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel and definitely make sure you click that bell icon because that will allow YouTube to notify you when new videos go live so you don't miss anything. Also, feel free to give the video a like if you like it. If you don't like it, give it a down, a dislike as well. That's fine. But leave us a comment. We want to know regardless. We want to know how you feel. We want to know if you're doing RPG A Day 2018, where we can interact with you, where we can find your content. And hopefully, in the not too distant future, we will be creating more content around what exactly the UnNamed Production Company is and how we can help you level up your streams. So have a good day, everyone.